There are things you find when you aren't looking, things hidden in plain sight, things tucked behind ordinary moments and everyday routines, things that were always there, waiting quietly, patient as stone, until the exact moment you were ready to see them. I wasn't ready, but I found it anyway. It was a Sunday morning in February, the kind of morning that feels slow and safe. Gray sky outside the window, coffee brewing in the kitchen. My husband Daniel still asleep upstairs. The house quiet in that particular way that Sunday mornings are quiet, heavy and peaceful and completely ordinary. I was looking for the television remote, that's all. Nothing dramatic, nothing intentional. Just a woman in her pajamas, searching between sofa cushions for a small plastic rectangle so she could watch the morning news with her coffee. I found it between the third and fourth cushion on the left side of the couch. But I also found something else. A phone. Not our home phone. Not Daniel's regular phone. The one I knew. The one that sat on the kitchen counter every evening charging. The one whose passcode I could have guessed easily because we had no secrets between us. Or so I believed. This phone was different. Smaller. Older model. Dark gray. No case. Completely plain. The kind of phone that is specifically designed to look like nothing important. I picked it up slowly, turned it over in my hands. It was charged. Recently charged, by the brightness of the screen when I accidentally pressed the side button. And it was unlocked. I stared at that lit screen for what felt like a very long time. My coffee was still brewing in the kitchen. The house was still quiet. Daniel was still asleep upstairs. Everything around me was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago, but something inside me had already changed completely. Because I knew, the way women know things before they have evidence, the way the body understands danger before the mind catches up, I already knew what this phone was, and I already knew that opening it would split my life into two halves, before this moment, and everything after. I sat down on the couch, held the phone in both hands, and made a decision that I have never once regretted. I opened it. My name is Sarah. I was 41 years old on that Sunday morning, married for 11 years, mother of 2 children, Lily, who was 9, and James, who was 7. Owner of a small interior design business I had built from nothing over the previous 6 years. Resident of a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood that I had decorated carefully and loved genuinely. I was, by every external measure, a woman with a complete and stable life. And in the space of one Sunday morning, everything I thought I knew about that life began to unravel. The betrayal revealed in full. The phone opened to a messaging application I recognized immediately. The conversation at the top was the most recent one. The contact name simply said, Lauren. I remember the way my hands felt holding that phone, completely steady. That surprised me even in the moment. I expected shaking, expected the physical symptoms of shock. Instead, my hands were perfectly still, the way hands sometimes go still when the body understands that what comes next requires absolute steadiness. I scrolled upward slowly, reading. The messages went back 14 months. 14 months. I read for a long time, much longer than I should have sat there on that couch. The coffee finished brewing in the kitchen. The gray morning light shifted slowly, and I read every single message from the beginning. I'm not going to share the specific words, not because they weren't devastating, but because some pain is private, and the exact language of someone else's betrayal doesn't belong in this story as entertainment. What I will tell you is this: it was not a casual thing, not a brief mistake, not a moment of weakness that spiraled before anyone knew how to stop it. It was deliberate, sustained, emotionally invested on both sides. Daniel told this woman things about our marriage, about me, about our home and our children and our life together. He described our relationship in terms that I barely recognized: cold, routine, functional, but empty. Meanwhile, I had spent 11 years believing we were genuinely happy. Not perfectly happy. No marriage is perfectly happy, but honestly happy, properly connected. Reading his words to her about me felt like reading a stranger's description of someone I had never met. And the cruelest part? He described the children gently to her, lovingly even. He spoke about Lily and James with warmth in his words, but he never once, in 14 months of messages, expressed concern about what any of this would do to them. That told me everything I needed to know about the version of Daniel I was only now meeting properly. I put the phone down on the cushion beside me, stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured my coffee, stood at the kitchen window looking at our backyard, the children's swing set, the garden I planted last spring, the fence Daniel repainted 2 summers ago, and I made a second decision, just as important as the first. I was not going to confront him immediately, not out of fear, not out of weakness, out of strategy. Because here is something I understood in that kitchen, with cold clarity that I cannot fully explain. An immediate confrontation would give Daniel control of the narrative. He would cry or deny or explain or apologize or manipulate, whatever version of himself best served his survival in that moment. And I would be reacting emotionally while he managed the situation practically. I had just spent the last 40 minutes reading evidence of how practiced he was at managing situations to serve himself. I was not going to hand him that advantage. I finished my coffee, took a shower, made breakfast for my children when they woke up, smiled at Daniel when he came downstairs, said good morning like a woman who found the remote and nothing else, and inside, completely quietly, I began to plan. Sarah's transformation begins. To understand what I did next, you need to understand who I was before that Sunday morning. I am not someone who performs emotions for approval. I was raised by practical people. My mother was an accountant. My father ran a small contracting business. We were a family that solved problems instead of dramatizing them. Feelings were acknowledged, but action was always the priority. I carried that into adulthood, into my marriage, into my business. My interior design company started as a side project when Lily was a baby. I took on small residential jobs at first, kitchen renovations, living room redesigns, bedroom makeovers for clients who needed fresh energy in familiar spaces. Then it grew. Commercial clients, office redesigns, a hotel renovation contract that changed everything. By the time that Sunday morning arrived, I had 7 regular staff members and a client list that kept me legitimately busy and financially independent. That financial independence turned out to be the most important thing I had ever built. Because the morning after finding the phone, I sat at my work desk while the children were at school and Daniel was at his office, and I called the one person I trusted completely with something this significant. My oldest friend, Rachel. Rachel was a family law attorney. I want to be very precise about what I told her in that first call. I told her I needed general information, hypothetically, about how assets and finances are typically handled in divorce proceedings, about what documentation matters most, about what a financially independent spouse should understand before any official process begins. Rachel was quiet for a moment after I finished speaking. Then she said, "Sarah, how long have you known?" "Since yesterday," I answered. Another pause. "Do you have the phone?" "Yes." "Don't confront him yet," she said immediately. "I know," I replied. She exhaled slowly. "Okay. Come to my office Thursday. Bring everything you can document quietly. Bank statements, property documents, business records, anything in your own name and anything joint." I wrote everything down carefully. Then I went back to work, designed a kitchen renovation for a client in the north of the city, picked my children up from school at 3:30, made dinner, helped James with his reading homework, watched television beside Daniel on the couch, where I had found the hidden phone less than 48 hours earlier, and said absolutely nothing. Some people would call that performance, pretending everything is fine when everything is broken. But I want to tell you something important. It wasn't performance. It was preparation. There is a profound difference between those two things. Performance is about protecting someone else's comfort at the expense of your own truth. Preparation is about protecting your own future while the other person remains unaware of what is coming. Daniel was not owed my emotional reaction on his timeline. He had spent 14 months on his timeline, operating according to his agenda, managing his situation to serve his interests. For once, I was going to operate on mine. Sarah documents everything. What followed was the most disciplined period of my entire life. 6 weeks of complete composure, complete normalcy on the surface, complete focus underneath. I met with Rachel 3 times during those 6 weeks. Each time I brought more documentation. Each time Rachel helped me understand exactly where I stood legally and financially. The picture that emerged was both reassuring and infuriating. Reassuring because my business was entirely in my name, built with my own money, my own clients, my own reputation, legally untouchable in any separation proceedings as long as I handled things correctly. Infuriating because Daniel had apparently been slowly moving small amounts of money, not dramatically, not obviously, just quietly redirecting occasional portions of his income into a personal savings account I had no visibility into. Not enough to be clearly illegal, but enough to matter. Rachel documented everything carefully and explained my options with the precision of someone who had handled hundreds of situations exactly like this. She was professional and completely unemotional about it, which is exactly what I needed. I also, and I want to be honest about this part, kept the hidden phone. Not secretly, not illegally. I simply didn't return it to where I found it. I photographed every significant message and transferred those photographs to a secure cloud account that only I could access. Then I kept the phone itself in a locked drawer in my home office. Daniel looked for it once, about 3 weeks in. I watched him searching the living room with an expression of controlled panic that he tried very hard to disguise as casual searching for a misplaced item. He didn't ask me directly if I had seen it, because asking me directly would have required explaining what it was, and I didn't offer. I simply watched him search, said nothing, and returned to whatever I was doing. That was perhaps the moment I realized the full extent of how composed I had become. Because watching Daniel search for the phone he used to deceive me and feeling nothing but clear, quiet certainty, that was a different version of me than the woman who stood at the kitchen window 2 days after finding it. That woman was grieving. This woman was ready. During those 6 weeks, I also did something that might surprise you. I started paying close attention to Lauren, not obsessively, not in a way that consumed me, but with the careful attention of someone gathering information that might eventually matter. Lauren was 34. She worked in marketing at a firm downtown. She had her own social media presence, public enough to observe without any intrusion. She was professionally accomplished, presentable, someone who, in a different context, I might have respected. She also had absolutely no idea that Daniel had children. I discovered this through a message I had photographed. A message from about 6 months earlier, where she asked him directly, "Do you ever think about having kids someday?" And Daniel, my husband, the father of my 9 and 7-year-old, replied, "Honestly, I'm not sure I'm a kid person. Maybe someday." I read that message 3 times. Then I put my phone down, breathed carefully, and added it to the growing file of things that would eventually matter. Because Lauren deserved to know the truth about the man she thought she was building something with. Not to hurt her, not to use her against Daniel, simply because she deserved it. She was being deceived too, just differently than me. The unexpected opportunity. 5 weeks into my quiet preparation, something happened that I hadn't planned for. Daniel came home one Thursday evening with news he clearly considered exciting. His company was pursuing a significant new development contract, a commercial property redesign, large budget, high profile, and the client, apparently, had specifically requested that the interior design component be handled by a reputable local firm. Daniel sat across from me at dinner, looking genuinely enthused for the first time in weeks, and said, "They're actually looking at a few design firms for the interior work. I gave them your company's name." I kept my expression perfectly neutral. "That was thoughtful," I said. He smiled. "I figured it could be good for you. The contract is substantial. It would be a big project." What Daniel didn't realize, couldn't have realized, because he had no idea what I had been quietly building over the previous 5 weeks, was that he had just handed me something unexpected. A legitimate professional reason to access information about his company's financial dealings. Because interior design contracts at that level require due diligence on both sides. My business reviewing their financial stability, understanding their project funding, verifying their payment reliability, standard professional practice. I called Rachel the next morning. She was quiet for a moment when I explained it. Then, "That is either a coincidence or the universe has a particular sense of humor." "I know," I said. "Handle it completely professionally," she said immediately. "Everything by the book, nothing that could be questioned later." "Obviously," I replied. "And Sarah?" "Yes." "Document everything your professional review turns up." "Of course," I answered. 3 days later, I had an initial meeting with Daniel's company regarding the potential design contract, not with Daniel, with the project director and the financial officer. And what I found during the due diligence process for a routine commercial interior contract was, to put it carefully, interesting. Not illegal necessarily, but irregular in ways that a financially literate person would notice. Vendor relationships that seemed structured oddly, expense categorizations that didn't quite match standard practice, payment flows that suggested money moving through the project in ways that weren't entirely straightforward. I documented everything my professional review legitimately uncovered, filed it properly with my own business records, and added it to the growing file. Because here is the thing about dishonest people. The deception rarely stays in one area of life. People who deceive their spouses often deceive their employers. People who manage secret relationships often manage money with similar creativity. The habits of dishonesty tend to spread. And Daniel, it turned out, had been considerably more creative in multiple directions than I had initially understood. The legal strategy crystallizes. My 6th and final preparation meeting with Rachel happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before I had decided to act. I sat across from her desk and she looked at everything I had brought with the expression of someone who had started this process expecting something manageable and had watched it become something considerably larger. She set down the last document carefully, looked up at me. "Sarah," she said, "do you understand what you have here?" "I think so," I answered. "Not just the personal materials," she said. "The professional documentation from the due diligence process, combined with the financial records you pulled from your joint accounts, combined with what the hidden phone contains." She paused. "This is not a standard divorce file." I nodded slowly. "The personal betrayal is significant," she continued carefully. "But the financial picture, the personal account he was quietly building, combined with what your professional review found at his company, that creates a situation where his position in any proceeding is considerably weaker than he currently believes." I had suspected this. Hearing it stated plainly by someone with 30 years of family law experience made it real in a different way. "What do I do?" I asked. Rachel looked at me steadily. "You've already done most of it. Now you decide when and how." She handed me a folder. Inside was a prepared legal document, A formal notification of intent to separate, drafted professionally, referencing key financial matters that would require full disclosure in any proceedings. She explained it carefully. When you give him this, he will immediately understand the scope of what you know. Not everything, but enough. Enough that he will know that a quick, quiet settlement in his favor is not possible. I took the folder, sat with it in my hands for a moment. Then I asked Rachel something I had been thinking about for several days. Lauren doesn't know he has children. Rachel frowned slightly. How do you know that? The phone, I answered simply. She was quiet. I'm not going to use her against him, I said clearly. That's not what this is about. But she is being deceived. She believes she's building a future with a man who has presented himself completely falsely. Rachel considered this carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that she deserves the truth, I said. Not from me delivering it as a weapon, but simply as truth that finds her. Rachel looked at me for a long moment, then quietly said, You're a more generous person than most would be in your position. I'm not generous, I replied honestly. I'm just very tired of deception existing in spaces where truth should be. She nodded slowly. Handle that part carefully, she said, and separately from the legal process, never together. Understood, I answered. I drove home that afternoon with the folder on the passenger seat. 2 children who needed collecting from school at 3:30, a dinner to prepare, a normal Tuesday evening to perform, and a Thursday to prepare for. Because Thursday was when everything was going to change. The night of reckoning. I chose a Thursday evening deliberately. Children at my mother's house for the night. I had arranged that a week earlier, under the simple cover of a spontaneous grandmother sleepover that Lily and James were both delighted about. Dinner made. The same care I always brought to our home. Not because Daniel deserved it, but because I wanted to be clear in my own mind that when this happened, I was composed, prepared, not reactive. Daniel came home at 6:45, kissed my cheek in the kitchen, asked where the children were. Moms, I said. Sleepover. They were excited. He smiled. Nice. Quiet evening then. Yes, I answered. Sit down. Dinner's ready. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the same table where we had eaten thousands of meals together, where the children did homework, where we celebrated birthdays and discussed holidays and had the ordinary conversations that form the fabric of a shared life. He served himself and started talking about his week. I listened. Let him talk. Let the meal progress through its natural rhythm. And when the plates were nearly finished and the conversation had reached one of its natural pauses, I stood up quietly, walked to the side table near the kitchen doorway, where I had placed 2 things before he arrived home: the legal folder Rachel had prepared, and the hidden phone. I brought both back to the table, set them down in front of Daniel, sat back in my chair, and waited. He looked at both objects, first the folder, then the phone, and I watched the color leave his face so completely and so quickly that it was almost clinical to observe. His eyes came up to meet mine. For the first time in 11 years, I saw something in Daniel's expression that I had never seen there before. Terror, not guilt, not remorse, not even shame. Pure, unfiltered terror. Because in that single moment, he understood something that no amount of charm or management or practiced explanation could address. She knows, not just about Lauren, everything. Sarah, he started. Don't, I said quietly. Just that one word. He stopped. I opened the folder and turned it to face him. This is a formal notification of intent to separate. Rachel Jennings prepared it. You'll recognize her name from the legal references at the top. You should contact your own attorney before responding to any of it." He stared at the document without touching it. "The financial disclosures required are outlined on page 3, I continued, including the personal savings account and the professional matters that came up during my due diligence review for the design contract your company referred to me." I paused, which was an interesting choice in retrospect. He closed his eyes briefly. "The phone," I said, "I've had for 6 weeks. Everything on it has been photographed and stored. You don't need to worry about the physical device. It's not the evidence. The documentation is." Daniel opened his eyes. He looked like a man standing on ground that had become something other than solid. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 weeks, I answered. "Since I found the phone in the couch cushions on a Sunday morning in February." The expression that crossed his face then was something I will carry with me for a long time. Not because it satisfied me, but because it was the first completely honest expression I had seen from him in what was apparently a very long time. Raw, uncomplicated devastation. "I'm sorry," he said, and I believe he meant it, in the way people mean things when it is far too late for meaning to change anything. "I know," I replied quietly. Then I stood up, picked up my glass, and said the last thing I planned to say that evening. "The children are at my mother's tonight. I've arranged to stay at Rachel's. The house is yours for the evening to process whatever you need to process. I'll be back tomorrow morning when you've left for work." He stared at me. "You planned this," he said, not accusingly, just with the quiet wonder of someone realizing something significant. "Yes," I answered simply. "For how long?" 6 weeks, I said again. He looked at the folder, the phone, then back at me. And for the first time since he walked through the door that evening, something shifted in his expression past the terror, something that looked very much like genuine respect, not the comfortable, taken-for-granted kind, the earned kind, the reluctant kind, the kind that arrives too late. I picked up my prepared overnight bag from beside the hallway closet, walked to the front door, and before I opened it, I turned back once and said something I hadn't planned, something that came from a very honest place. "I loved you genuinely for 11 years, Daniel. That's real, and it was real. Don't spend the rest of your life pretending it wasn't just because it's over now." Then I left. The door closed behind me quietly. No slamming, no drama, no tears on the doorstep. Just a woman walking to her car on a Thursday evening, breathing clean air for the first time in 6 weeks. The truth finds its way. I want to be very precise about how I handled Lauren, because this part of the story matters, and I think it is the part most people would handle incorrectly. The temptation, when you discover a betrayal of this nature, is to contact the other person immediately and emotionally, to deliver the truth as a weapon, to use it to cause maximum damage to the man who hurt you by simultaneously destroying the relationship he chose over yours. I understood that temptation completely. I did not act on it. Instead, 2 weeks after the Thursday dinner, after Daniel had retained an attorney, after Rachel and his attorney had begun the formal process, after the children had been told carefully and gently that their parents were going to be living differently, I sent Lauren a single message. One message, from my own name, my own number. It said this: "My name is Sarah, Daniel's wife. I'm not reaching out to hurt you or blame you. I'm reaching out because you deserve the truth. Daniel has 2 children, a daughter named Lily, who is 9, and a son named James, who is 7. We have been married for 11 years. I found the phone 6 weeks ago. I wanted you to have accurate information about the person you've been building a future with. I won't contact you again. I wish you well. I sent it. Then I put my phone down, and I meant every word of it, not as a weapon, as information. The kind of information Lauren deserved to have. The kind that allowed her to make an honest decision about her own life going forward. She replied 3 hours later. Her message was short, clearly written by someone in profound shock. He told me he had no children, that he'd never been married. I had no idea. I am so sorry. I read it once, replied, I believe you. And that was the entirety of my contact with Lauren, because she wasn't my enemy. She was another person Daniel had chosen to deceive, for different reasons and in different directions, but deceived nonetheless. What happened between her and Daniel after that was not my business and not my concern. What I know is that she ended things with him immediately, not because I asked her to, not because I applied any pressure, because once the truth arrived, the illusion he had built for her became impossible to maintain, and illusions, once dissolved, don't reassemble. That is the thing about deception. It requires constant maintenance, constant energy, constant management of information and narrative and perception. Once truth enters the space where deception lived, everything built on the deception has to come down too. The part that hurt. Most people who haven't been through the end of a marriage with children tend to focus on the dramatic elements, the confrontation, the legal proceedings, the financial resolution. They underestimate the quieter devastation. Telling Lily and James was the hardest thing I have ever done. We told them together, Daniel and I, in the living room on a Saturday afternoon. Both of us present because whatever we were to each other now, we were still their parents, and that required a united front for the conversation that would change their understanding of their world. Lily went completely still when we started speaking. She was 9, and therefore old enough to understand more than we might have wished. She sat with her hands in her lap and her face perfectly composed, and I watched her process what we were saying with a maturity that broke my heart, because children shouldn't need that kind of maturity. James cried almost immediately, 7 years old, and already understanding that something large was changing, even if the specifics were beyond him. We told them simply, no blaming, no adult details, just the essential truth. Mom and Dad were going to live in different houses. They would still see both of us constantly. Nothing that mattered about their lives was changing, except the address where their father slept. Lily looked at me when we finished and asked one question. Are you okay, Mom? That question, from a 9-year-old child. Looking at her mother with quiet concern in the middle of the most difficult conversation of her young life. I held her face in my hands and answered as honestly as I could. I'm going to be, I said. I promise. She nodded seriously. Then she went and hugged her father, because she was 9 years old and she loved him regardless of everything, as she should, as I hoped she always would, because children's love for their parents should not become collateral damage in adult failures. That was something I committed to in those early weeks and never moved from. Daniel was not going to become a villain in the story I told my children. He was going to remain their father, imperfect, human, someone who made choices that hurt our family, but still the person who coached James's Saturday football and attended every one of Lily's school performances and sat up with sick children through long nights. Those things were real too, and my children deserved to keep them. The weeks that followed were difficult in the specific, grinding way that family reorganization is difficult. Not dramatic, just relentlessly demanding. Schools to notify, routines to restructure, a second home to establish. Children moving between two spaces with two sets of rules and two sets of emotions. I handled each day as it came, one thing at a time, the same approach I had used for 6 weeks of preparation. Practical, focused, moving forward. The legal resolution, justice, in practical form. The formal separation proceedings took 4 months. Rachel was exceptional. thorough, strategic, and completely unintimidated by Daniel's attorney, who was good, but not exceptional. The financial picture that emerged during full disclosure confirmed much of what I had already documented quietly. The personal savings account Daniel had been building, the professional irregularities that my due diligence had uncovered. Not all of it was legally actionable in the context of our divorce proceedings, but all of it shaped the negotiating position. Daniel's attorney came to the table knowing their client's position was weaker than expected. Daniel himself, apparently, had told his attorney only a partial version of events, which meant his attorney spent the first 2 sessions slowly realizing their client had not been fully forthcoming. That realization was visible in the changing tone of their communications. Rachel handled it cleanly and professionally. The settlement that emerged was fair, more than fair to me, appropriately adjusted to account for the financial management that had disadvantaged me during the marriage. The house was mine. I had contributed more significantly to its purchase and maintenance. The business was entirely mine, which had never been in question. A financial settlement was agreed that reflected the full picture rather than the partial one Daniel had initially presented. He didn't fight it ultimately, and I think, though he never said this directly, he understood why, because Daniel knew, by the time those negotiations concluded, the full scope of what I had documented. He knew the extent to which the truth was on record. He knew that any aggressive legal strategy on his part would require him to contest evidence that was extensive, organized, and professionally handled. He chose instead to settle reasonably. And honestly, that decision showed more wisdom than most of what came before it. The day the settlement was finalized, Rachel and I had coffee in her office afterward. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it genuinely before answering. "Like I can breathe properly," I said. She smiled. "Good. That's the right answer." The life that rebuilt itself. It has been 6 months since the settlement finalized. The house is mine and the children's. We reorganized it slightly. New paint in the hallway, different furniture arrangement in the living room. Not because the old version was wrong, because new chapters deserve new settings. The couch where I found the phone is gone, replaced by a different one, softer, wider, better for Sunday mornings with children climbing in beside you with their cereal and their questions and their complete, uncomplicated need for your presence. My business grew during those 6 months, not despite everything, partly because of it. Because when you stop spending emotional energy managing an unbalanced relationship, that energy goes somewhere. And for me, it went directly into the work I had always loved. We hired 2 additional staff members, took on 3 new commercial contracts. I presented at an industry event in the spring that generated more referrals than I expected. The company is mine, built honestly, growing genuinely, belonging entirely to no one but me and the people who work there. Lily started playing the violin. She is, by objective measure, not yet gifted at it. She practices every evening with complete commitment regardless. I listen from the kitchen while making dinner, and I find the imperfect notes more beautiful than any performance I could attend. James lost his first tooth and was deeply invested in the financial implications of the tooth fairy arrangement. He negotiated, successfully. He is 7 and already a more effective negotiator than most adults I encounter professionally. They are fine, not unmarked by what happened. Children don't emerge from family changes without marks, but fine, resilient, loved properly by both parents operating in separate spaces with a shared commitment to their well-being. Daniel and I have found a way to be civil, not warm, not close, but genuinely civil in the way that shared parenthood requires. We attend school events together without tension. We coordinate holidays without conflict. We are adults managing a situation responsibly because 2 small people need us to. That took work. I won't pretend otherwise, but it was worth the work because my children are watching how this is handled and what they learn about dignity and respect and managing pain without cruelty. They will carry that into their own lives and their own relationships. That matters more than anything else. As for Daniel, He is living in an apartment across the city, still working, though in a different capacity, following the professional review that my due diligence set in motion. He seems quieter, more considered, less performative in the ways he used to be. I don't follow his life closely. It's not my business anymore. But the few times I've seen him during school pickups or children's events, he looks like someone who has been through something significant and is slowly figuring out what to do with what remains. I understand that feeling. Lauren, from what I understand through completely indirect channels, ended things with him and moved on with her own life. I hope she's well. I genuinely do. She deserved the truth and she received it. That's all any of us deserve.
The reflection. The power of composure. People who heard about this story, and eventually some did, because stories like this don't stay fully private, asked me variations of the same question. How did you stay so calm? How did you sit across from him at dinner every evening for 6 weeks, knowing what you knew and say nothing? How did you help him look for his phone without telling him you had it? How did you attend his company's meeting as a prospective design partner while simultaneously documenting their financial practices? How did you not simply explode? And the honest answer is this: I wasn't calm. I was purposeful. Those are not the same thing. Calm suggests the absence of feeling. What I had was the opposite. I felt everything: grief, anger, disbelief, the particular devastation of discovering that someone you loved completely was living partially elsewhere. I felt all of it. I just chose not to let it direct my actions, because I understood something in those early days that I want to share with you as clearly as I can. Immediate emotional reaction serves the person who caused the pain. When you confront someone in the raw first moments of betrayal, you give them control. You give them the opportunity to manage your emotion, to apologize or explain or deflect or minimize on their terms, to shape the narrative while you are too overwhelmed to shape it yourself. You become the reaction. They remain the director. I refused that position. By taking 6 weeks, by documenting quietly, by building a full picture before presenting any of it, I ensured that when the moment arrived, I was not reacting to his situation. He was responding to mine. That shift, from reactive to purposeful, is the most significant thing that happened during those 6 weeks. Not what I found, not what I documented, not the legal strategy Rachel built. The shift inside me, from a woman blindsided by someone else's deception, to a woman who understood that deception in full and decided exactly how to respond to it. That shift cannot be manufactured quickly. It requires time and quiet and the courage to sit with pain without letting it make your decisions for you. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and it was worth everything. The emotional truth, full honesty. There is a letter I wrote to myself during the 4th week, late at night when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, and the composure I maintained during daylight hours had nothing left to hold together. I have never shown it to anyone, but I want to share it here, because I think the truth of that letter is important. It is 2 a.m, and I am sitting at my desk, and I am tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. I found the phone 3 weeks ago, and I have managed everything correctly. Rachel is satisfied. The documentation is thorough. The plan is sound. But underneath the plan is a woman who spent 11 years loving someone who was partially somewhere else. And that woman is not managing. That woman is devastated. I miss the marriage I thought I had, not the marriage that actually existed. I understand now that the marriage I thought I had was partially a construction, built on Daniel's performance and my willingness to accept what was presented without looking more carefully. But the feelings were real. My love was real. My investment in our life was completely real. And losing something real, even when it was built on something false, is a genuine loss. I am allowed to grieve that. I am allowed to be furious.
I am allowed to sit here at 2 in the morning and cry for the version of my life that turned out to be different from what I believed. And I am also allowed to stand up tomorrow and continue. Both of these things are true simultaneously. Grief and strength are not opposites. They live in the same person at the same time. And the person I am becoming through this, the version of me that is documenting and planning and protecting my children and building forward, she is not cold. She is not unfeeling. She is not a machine. She is a woman who decided that her pain was not going to become her identity, that her betrayal was not going to become her story, that what someone did to her was not going to define what she did next. I want to remember this letter when things are better, when the settlement is done and the children are settled and the house is ours and the business is growing and Sunday mornings are peaceful again. I want to remember that the woman who built all of that was also the woman crying at 2 in the morning in the 4th week, that she was both things fully, and that both things were necessary. I read that letter again recently, and I am proud of the woman who wrote it. The final truth. The moral. This story has been called a revenge story, and I want to spend a moment being honest about that. Because what I did was not revenge in the dramatic sense. I did not set out to destroy Daniel. I did not engineer his professional difficulties. I simply did not cover them up once I found them. I did not orchestrate Lauren's discovery. I simply delivered her the truth once and let her make her own decisions. I did not construct his consequences. I simply stopped protecting him from the ones he had already built. And I want to offer you the distinction between those two things as clearly as I can. Revenge in its most common form is about causing pain in return for pain received. It is reactive. It is emotionally driven. And almost always, it costs the person enacting it something significant. It keeps you connected to the person who hurt you. It makes their actions the ongoing center of your attention and energy. It ties your healing to their suffering. What I did was different. What I did was simply choose honesty over protection. Choose my own integrity over his comfort. Choose my children's security over his convenient narrative, and then move forward. The consequences that arrived for Daniel were the natural result of choices he made, not things I inflicted, not a plan I designed to cause maximum damage. Simply truth, finding the spaces where deception had been living. That distinction matters because I think many people, facing betrayal, facing injustice, facing the discovery that someone they trusted has been something other than they presented, feel the pull toward dramatic action, toward the satisfaction of visible explosive consequence. And I understand that pull completely. But visible and explosive tends to burn the person holding it as much as the target. Quiet and purposeful tends to protect you while the truth does the necessary work. Here is what I know after everything. The most powerful thing I did in the 6 weeks between finding the phone and placing it on the dinner table was not the documentation, not the legal preparation, not the strategic planning. It was the daily decision to remain exactly who I was, to continue working excellently, to continue parenting carefully, to continue building forward, to continue being the woman Daniel was apparently unable to fully appreciate while he had her. Because that continuity, that unbroken thread of being genuinely myself through the worst weeks of my adult life, meant that when everything resolved, I was still here, intact, not diminished, not defined by what he did, still the person I was building before he made his choices. The phone was hidden in the couch cushions, but the real discovery wasn't the phone. The real discovery was what I was capable of when tested. And that discovery, no one can take from you, not by lying, not by leaving, not by choosing someone else, not by hiding phones and furniture and building secret lives in parallel to the honest one you share. Because who you are at your core, that is entirely yours. And honestly, finding that out was worth everything it cost to get there. The closing. full circle. It is a Sunday morning. The sky outside is that particular gray blue that February mornings carry. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, children still asleep upstairs. The house quiet in that particular way that Sunday mornings are quiet. I am sitting on the new couch. There is no hidden phone in the cushions. There is no parallel life running alongside mine.